Now, New England's award-winning nightly news analysis program, hosted by Chet Curtis and Jim Browning. This is Newsnight.
Foreign jihadists arrived across Iraq's borders in small groups with the goal of installing a Taliban-like regime. Saddam loyalists and foreign terrorists may have different long-term goals, but they share a near-term strategy: to terrorize Iraqis, to intimidate America and our allies.
President George Bush in Washington today. He was speaking about America's commitment in Iraq and elsewhere, honoring American soldiers serving abroad on Veterans Day, on a day when attacks took place on American forces in Baghdad and Afghanistan. Good evening, I'm Chet Curtis.
And I'm Jim Browning. And on a day when America's point person in Iraq, Paul Bremer, was called home to discuss what some might call a long, hard political slog over there in Iraq.
ABC's Nancy Weiner has more on today's event.
As the sun set in Iraq, a series of explosions rocked central Baghdad. Military officials say 2 rockets struck the Green Zone, the enclosed area which houses the U.S.-led coalition complex. No one was injured, but the attack was a reminder on this Veterans Day of just how perilous life continues to be for U.S. troops serving in Iraq. After laying a wreath at Arlington Cemetery's Tomb of the Unknowns, President Bush paid tribute to all veterans, but made special mention of those who served in the Middle East, but died before they could be called veterans.
They died in distant lands to fight terror, to advance freedom, and to protect America.
Later in the day, in a speech to the Conservative Heritage Foundation, the president insisted the U.S. will not be intimidated by attacks on its troops.
We will be steadfast. We will finish the mission we have begun, period.
There are some indications, however, that the administration wants to speed up the job. The top U.S. civilian in Iraq, Paul Bremer, has been abruptly called back to Washington. Senior officials say the White House wants to determine if it's possible to shorten the timeline for handing power back to the Iraqis. Some U.S. officials have complained about the slow pace of progress of the Iraqi Governing Council, which has a December 15th deadline to set a schedule for drafting a constitution and holding elections. Nancy Weiner, ABC News, Washington.
Are today's events a turning point in the effort to put Iraqis back in charge in Iraq and bring U.S. troops home? Shakir Mustafa is an Iraqi and a visiting professor of foreign languages and literature at Boston University. Farouk El-Baz is also a professor at Boston University. He served as an advisor to the late Egyptian president Anwar Sadat from 1978 to 81. And Joe Sarian is an attorney who worked for the Minister of Defense at the Coalition Provisional Authority in Baghdad. Gentlemen, welcome. Joe, let me start with you. You had most recent experience over there in Baghdad. The White House said that Bremer's hastily called return to Washington was neither routine nor a crisis. But obviously there is growing frustration with what's going on over there in terms of drafting a constitution and moving ahead toward having elections. How do you read it?
Well, I do. I believe under the circumstances, the fact that he has been rushed back to Washington, that's an indication that I think the administration is reconsidering its options as to how to proceed from now on. Given the situation in Iraq and the increasing violence and the political instability in the country and the continuing chaotic situation, I think has brought about a lot of criticism back at home. And this was probably about the time where there should be some reconsideration of some of the plans that we have to.
Farouk, the conventional wisdom is that if the quicker the turnover of power is to Iraqis, the quicker will be the cessation of violence in Iraq. Do you buy the conventional wisdom?
Yes, because most of the activities right now are directed against the occupation forces. So they consider the military guys, both from the U.S. and Britain, as occupation force. So they will violate all the scheme to make sure that these people are not there for too long.
Shaka, do you buy that too?
I would probably modify this, because in the South, the British are not being attacked as frequently or as viciously as the Americans are in Baghdad and in the Sunni Triangle. And the reason is that I think in the South, the British are relating to the Iraqi public, to the Iraqi reality, much more effectively than the American forces.
Well, Farouk, this U.S.-appointed governing council has done nothing substantive. They have a December 15th deadline to come up with the Constitution. We've been reading that sometimes meetings aren't held. If they are, they're sparsely attended. Is it time to rethink that whole thing and perhaps move ahead with restoring some sovereignty to the Iraqis without a constitution?
I think the governing council was a joke to start with. The whole idea, the whole notion was bad news. But if you establish ministers and you get some movement from a government of doing things, that's all you need. Because there is no governing council that these people meet together and they talk about things for hours and hours and nothing happens.
But they're not the problem is the organization you used to work for. Essentially, anything that that Iraqi Governing Council does has to be approved by the Coalition Provisional Authority headed by Paul Bremer, so there's almost no reason for them to meet to begin with. They have no power.
Well, that may be true. However, you have to remember that we're coming out of a war situation where there's still, although we are considered out of a war situation, it's still violence is increasing, and the coalition authority still has some concerns as to how the government has to be organized.
By the way, Ricardo Sanchez today, the lead military person there, went out of his way to call what is currently going on a war just for...
Yes, I believe that we're still in a war situation, and there ought to be some balancing factor, and I think the coalition forces are, at this point, very necessary. The Iraqis may consider it a necessary evil, but we ought to be there until a date for an election for a formal government is planned.
That's more reason. That's more reason to say that the coalition forces, the head of the coalition forces, rules the situation, and therefore you have ministers to do the job that needs to be done. The ruling council has no place in it.
They have a place. You know, they asserted themselves with regard to calling in Turkish troops. They made it very clear. They were against it, and they said, we are not going to accept Turkish troops, and the American coalition forces had to accept this. I think they could make their voices heard, but they are not given as many chances as they should. That's why we don't hear them.
Shakir, you talked about the attacks. We're averaging 30 to 35 attacks on U.S. troops, the coalition forces, essentially the U.S. troops, a day. That's more than twice the number of 2 months ago. Where is it coming from? Are there jihadists coming into the country?
I think Ramadan is influencing this. The jihadis are pouring into the country. Iraq was not a haven for terrorism, and it's really sad to see it now turning into a haven. They are coming in, and for them, it looks like they have a mission, fighting the Americans.
Farouk, what's the independent evidence? Even if people buy the conventional wisdom that both of you said was correct, that the quicker we turn over some power, the better things will get, what's the evidence that the Iraqi political leaders are ready to exercise that power?
The Iraqi political leadership was in control for a long time, and there are people that know about how to run the country. So all of the Iraqi population right now wishes to see the country being run right for the common benefit, and there is no such thing now. So if you have an administration of Iraqis that can even do half a decent job, everybody will accept it, because they need to stabilize, to say, all right, it's over, let's now eat, and let's go to work, let's do something good.
So has America's hesitation to date been, Joe, that if France and Germany want it, it must be a bad idea? Because this is essentially what France and Germany are saying, quicker turnover, provisional government like Hamid Karzai over there in Afghanistan.
Considering what I have seen in Iraq, the times were not ripe for handing over the government and the authority to the local Iraqis. I believe, again, that a time has to arrive, and that point in time that is ripe for election is the proper time when you have to hand over power and authority to the local Iraqis.
But they were talking about elections, Joe, they were talking about elections, setting the dates on December 15th of this year, and having the elections at the end of 2004. Are the Iraqi people willing to wait a year and a month to elect their own leaders?
That may be a problem, that poses a problem. I think perhaps if we can expedite that mission, it would probably be a better idea. I think we have to transfer power at some point. That will happen whether it's only a matter of timing. The council was a good idea as an interim government, so to speak, quote unquote. But I think election will be the. Remember that it would defeat the purpose if we do not wait for the elections and hand over power in the proper way. Because after all, we've gone in with the idea that we are going to establish democracy. And this would be the seed for democracy in the Middle East.
The current council, this is the problem, lacks legitimacy. It is a joke in Iraq. They crack jokes. And these people, these 30 people, do not have the feeling that they are part of a ruling coalition. You need, to get to a point where representative Iraqis are on the top tier of with the coalition forces before that legitimacy is established, and then you transfer the power to
This is the long run, though. But right now, what is wrong with the situation in Afghanistan? What is wrong with the Afghanistan situation?
Where there were no elections.
There are no elections. You have somebody to run the thing so that there will at least be some control of people, and there is one authority, and somebody is doing something.
Good. We've got to hold it right there. Take a quick break. We'll be back with our guests for more on the latest from Iraq after this.
I'm mindful of the filter through which some news travels, and sometimes you just have to go over the heads of the filter and speak directly to the people, and that's what we will continue to do.
That was President George Bush 1 month ago. He was criticizing American media outlets, saying they provided a filtered view of events in Iraq, Chad.
And he kept insisting that it was a negative filter, that all of the media in this country focusing on the negative and all of the attacks rather than on some positive things that were happening in the rest of the country.
In great part in response to that, ABC News recently did a series of pieces on where we are now in Iraq. We begin with Bob Woodruff's piece on the area south of Baghdad.
Heading south out of Baghdad, we hit a 45-minute traffic jam. It is an American checkpoint, and the drivers are fuming. It is difficult, too difficult now, this driver told us.
They should leave us now. Is it getting worse, getting better? More anti-Americanism, less?
It's day in, day out. Some days it's worse, some days it's better.
These would turn out to be the last American soldiers we'd encounter on our trip. South of Baghdad, the only foreign troops we saw were Italian and British. Iraqi police conduct most of the patrols. There is far less tension in the south, and attacks on coalition forces are rare. Largely because this is home to Iraq's Shiite Muslims, whose religion, business, and personal lives were so tightly controlled by Saddam Hussein, they are grateful for his overthrow.
We're just outside the shrine of Imam Ali in Najaf, one of the holiest sites in Shiite Islam. Since the fall of Saddam Hussein, the city has seen a massive influx of Iranian tourists, religious pilgrims from Iran, that has not only breathed new life into this town economically, but spiritually as well.
With all these new customers, business owners around the shrine say profits are soaring. Before, people were afraid to come to Najaf, this shopkeeper said. Now they are coming and our earnings have doubled. There are many Iraqis making more money since the war, especially those being paid by the U.S.-led coalition. Salaries at the water treatment plant have jumped from about $7 a month to $120. Students in Najaf who tried to impress us by ripping Saddam Hussein's image from their textbooks told us their teachers seem much happier. Hamid Abdullah says he can now teach what he wants, and he's earning $180 a month instead of $13.
Now with your new salary, what are your dreams then for the future?
Well, we need everything, he told us. We don't even have a telephone. The higher salaries have driven prices up. Jarrallah Ali, who lost his job as a civil servant, cannot buy what he could before the war.
Too much. The meat, the chicken, the fish, everything. We want to eat.
On the road toward Nasiriyah, we are reminded that the south is where much of the war was fought. One of Nasiriyah's 3 hospitals was destroyed by American bombs. So at the 2 other hospitals, the emergency rooms are overloaded. Doctors say shortages of medicine are worse than before the war because security concerns have held up deliveries. And everywhere we went in the south, the greatest concern among Iraqis was security. Our last stop was Iraq's 2nd largest city, Basra.
This is the Sheraton in Basra. Until the war, the nicest hotel in the city. What is remarkable about all this damage is that it was not caused by a bomb. It is the work of looters who picked this place apart piece by piece, bed by bed, door by door. This is where you work?
Yes, I'm here.
Amr Daoud was assistant manager here for 13 years. At first, she welcomed the war. Now she fears for her life and wishes the war never happened.
In the beginning, we was very happy, but now really we are feeling sorry about this change. They did nothing.
Amr represents so much of what is right and wrong in the South now. She's found a job with a higher salary in a new hotel where the electricity is always flowing. But now she and her colleagues keep AK-47s under the counter for protection. Bob Woodruff, ABC News in southern Iraq.
Back with our guests, Shakir Mustafa, Farouk El-Baz, and Joe Sarian. Shakir, you were amongst those who a minute ago said that expedited turnover of power to the Iraqis made sense. That's on the political level. How about on the economic level? We saw good news south of Baghdad. Does that continue to happen if it turns out there's this kind of rapid turnover?
You would hope for that, but it's not happening. The Americans are not pumping anything into the Iraqi economy. They are an isolated community, and they haven't been capable of bringing in businesses, nourishing, vitalizing, revitalizing the Iraqi economy.
Congress voted $18 billion that in part will rebuild those buildings and rework the infrastructure.
Perhaps when this money makes its way to Iraq, we will start seeing signs of economic revival.
Farouk, didn't the president, who was critical of the press for emphasizing the negative, have a point that things are better in other parts of the country, with the exception of the Sunni triangle, for example, as we saw in that report from Bob Woodruff?
Sure, but that's the media. No news is no news, and it's only bad news is good news. I mean, if it's raining, it's news. But if it's sunny, no, it's not news. So it's the nature of the media this way to report things that are happening that affect people that especially are bad. So I really think it is perfectly natural for the media to speak about the events that are not going the way we think they should have been.
But in 80% of the country, the administration argues, things are returning to normal. Is that an overstatement?
It's an overstatement because, as we just saw, yes, indeed, there are some people that have better salaries now and so on, but the security concerns are much worse, because here is a girl that's sitting with their on a hotel reception, and they have an AK-47. They are terrified for somebody's going to come and try to steal it. So the security is still loose, and the people do not feel secure.
Joe, you were shaking your head when Farouk was speaking.
Well, yes, but that's in total agreement, because as I remember, this is it's almost like history repeating itself, and that all along from day one that I've been in Iraq, the major concern with people that I was hiring was on a daily basis, the major complaint before food on the table was security and safety. And it seems like at this point, it's been several months have passed, and the same issue lingers on and on without major changes.
I talked with my family today. Earlier, they used to say, things are going on well. They are not going on well. Now, they said, we are not sure. We have no certainty.
But you also said something quite interesting during the break when we were all talking. You said that Iraqis as a whole think very well of Paul Bremer, the same man that runs the Provisional Authority that you think is keeping down the Governing Council. How does that...
I think there is some conflict between Bremer and his superiors in Washington. They are not giving him enough authority to do what he wants. And this is what the Iraqi newspapers are saying. They love him simply because he's involved with Iraqi issues. He listens to the Iraqis, the Iraqi Governing Council. But then not much is happening simply because his hands are tied.
But we must admit the fact that he was issued his request of $87.5 billion. I mean, that was his initiative.
What does the United States, or what can the United States do? Bremer's there now for obviously high-level talks. When he goes back, I mean, what can the United States do to move this process toward Iraqi sovereignty along?
I really think that the United States of America right now does not have the potential at all of subsidizing these security concerns the way it is. No way. I really think that the United States... Yeah, with these troops, yeah. The way to do it right now is to have a security force from some Arab country like Egypt, to say that within 300,000, within 3 months, we're going to get 300,000 Egyptian police people.
Why would
to
they
come
do
into
it?
this? Because they're Arabs. They are not there to occupy Baghdad. They are just there to keep the peace. And
so what would
they will
America
speak.
have to do to get Egypt to agree to that?
The Americans would just leave the towns 20 kilometers or 20 miles away from the towns, keep all the troops there, but stay away from the population.
You just returned from that part of the world.
Yes.
You were in Egypt. Is
Yes.
that something the Egyptian government would seriously entertain?
The Egyptian government would seriously entertain, because the Arab world, the whole Arab world is now feeling terrible about the fact that no one is doing a thing. They're all sitting and waiting for the United States to resolve this issue, and this issue will not be resolved. So
without Arab help.
Yeah, without Arab help.
Let's speak about the Arab world.
They have actually suggested the replacement of the American forces by Arab forces or an international force.
Let me read you a quote that was in a Tom Friedman column the other day. He was quoting the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, you know, the infamous speech where there was alleged anti-Semitism, but he said one of the most important points that was missed was this, that, quote, the single most underappreciated force in international relations is humiliation. And that the Iraqi people, and you're all shaking your heads affirmatively, feel humiliated by being occupied, and that humiliation begins to dissipate when they take control of themselves. Is that true?
Absolutely true. But I will confirm what Farouk said. You know, they would feel that they can relate to Arab forces or Arab countries much more easily than they would relate to, say, the American forces. They have seen America as the enemy for years. During the embargo on Iraq, they saw America very much as the enemy, and they are very suspicious of American
So why would we not do that, Joe? Why would we not essentially buy into this Egyptian plan that Farouk is announcing here?
But I think what the problem was always goes into, the humiliation comes in because of the lack of understanding and the cultural understanding as to how the individual Iraqi on the street reacts to whatever a soldier, an American or coalition forces soldiers react to them under certain circumstances. They've been humiliated, and under these circumstances, now they are soldiers being what they are simply trained in killing. They're not our goodwill ambassadors. So they do not know, they have no idea how to interact with the individual Iraqi on the streets. And this is bringing the security itself. The fact that we are now, which plays into this, is the fact that we're being now attacked by these terrorists. What's happening is that we're taking on a more aggressive role. Our soldiers in the streets are much more wary and concerned, and they're becoming much more aggressive. And this in itself has brought about a reaction, which is a negative reaction, interacting with the common regular.
And you cannot blame
Iraqi
the troops themselves, because these guys do not know how to speak the language, what are these people
not their
mean.
fault.
You know, so that's not their fault. So, but you need someone who speaks the language, who has some affinity towards these people, to say, I'm here only to keep the peace, and the soldiers are out of here.
And I think this is a major key.
Gentlemen, interesting discussion as always. Thanks to Shakir Mustafa, Farouk El-Baz, and Joe Sarian.
We'll be back with more Newsnight after this. Please stick around.